Next up, we have David Toomey, who's Principal Social Worker and Designated Officer, and Regina Chambers, who is a Social Work Team Leader and Designated Officer, and they are both from Western Care, and they are going to talk about their experiences of safeguarding.
Basically, what I want to do is tell you a little bit about our experience in Western Care. And the experience I'm going to share with you, I think, is the same experience that perhaps you have in your own setting. And I want to start by going back. I'm the Principal Social Worker in Western Care, and I was appointed in 1997, which is 20 years ago. And round of applause, thank you very much. So I've held that job. So, and in 1997, at the same time in Western Care, when I was appointed, we took on a system called personal outcome measures. And personal outcome measures was a whole new way of working in relation to the client comes first, the service user comes first, identifying their priorities, their interests in life. And it was a fantastic time that we begin to look at everything through their eyes. So when I was appointed in 1997, the very first thing I wanted to do was put in place the protection and welfare guideline. And we put in place protection guidelines in the summer of 1997. And then as I moved on in the year 2000, put in place a designated officer. And in 2000, the designated officer's role was to receive issues of concern, to address them in a smart fashion, and to ensure the ongoing safety and well-being of the individual. And then in 2007, myself and Regina, actually, and speaking of Anne, and I'm glad to be able to refer to Anne today, in 2007 we got together with Anne in Sligo, and we were reviewing our policy, and Anne was having a look at her policy, and we got a chance to do some joint work, and again then with Colin The Hand in 2008. So it's interesting the way things are happening now, and they're kind of reflective of where we were. Okay, so let's see now, there's nothing worse than having a script and then trying to deviate from it. So I might just move on a small bit. I was going to tell you, because they were talking about the Spice Girls earlier on, I was going to say I'd rather do a paper on should ABBA reform or not, but decided not to. Okay, so in relation to that gives the backdrop. So here we are now in 2017, and we have a whole national programme, okay? And as we know, that kicked off in late 2014. Then we had the procedures and policies in late 2014, the team set up in 2015, and then the training set up in 2016. And I suppose if I look back, I had a kind of a dream and a vision in the year 2000 and 2011 saying, wouldn't it be smart if we looked towards a kind of a national safeguarding team that kind of could have an oversight of all the work that we do, so that we wouldn't feel vulnerable in the work that we do. And at that time, I thought the answer might be to pluck the social work departments out of the disability sector and to create safeguarding teams. And that would release social workers when they're undertaking protection investigations and people's safeguarding away from the curtailment of finance. Because if you're looking at someone's situation and you're trying to make change, as we know well, you know, and there's 4 people living in one setting and 3 get on very well, one is causing chaos for the other 3, and he or she needs to live elsewhere. There's a whole cost factor in relation to delivering that, equally with the day services and in all other areas. So that was the vision that I had then. So therefore, I have to say, when it came into being in 2015, even though it wasn't quite like that vision, welcomed the whole introduction of the safeguarding team as an external oversight and a team that we can work with. Okay, so what I wanted to do today also was, my heading there is embedding and spreading. Okay, people thought that was not a nice way to put things, but I thought it was okay at the time. Okay, I have different thoughts now. So let's see. So designated officer I told you about, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience as designated officer. National safeguarding facilitator, I'm actually not going to go through that, because everything that we discussed this morning, God, I wouldn't say everything, that's terrible. Some of what we discussed this morning was in my presentation, and also in the question time there at 12:30. So I don't need to go too much on that front. Let's see, was there anything else there? So you can see my slides are nice and short. So first thing we're saying, so we start afresh and we have a national safeguarding training program, and we're saying, okay, we've got to do something. So it started with the staff training and support that's required, and we discussed that this morning. Then we have a service users education and learning opportunity. So what I was looking at over the years prior to the introduction of the safeguarding and since was the whole idea of relationships and sexuality. And I'm sure many people in this room have been involved in the education and the important education of our young adults and our older adults in relation to their whole well-being and self-awareness. So we have factored in the whole area of self-guarding and safeguarding into that education package. And we started with a population of about 60 people who are living independently. And we looked towards how can we actually help people really understand the awareness that we might have, and also looking through their eyes in relation to the way that they see the world. So it really was about building, and this is what I'm talking about today, building communication, building partnership. So the idea wasn't really to sit down with a group of people and just to talk to them about their lives. It was actually getting meaningful people to engage with. And that meant going to the guards. So we got the guards involved, and the guards talking about how do you protect yourself? How do you keep yourself safe on the streets at night? When do you go to an ATM machine? What time do you go? Who's around you at that time? And then we got involved with the RSA around crossing the road and safe crossing. And then we got involved in relation to an insurance company around working with people who live independently and the protection of opening the front door. Someone's at the front door. Who are they? How are you going to protect yourself? Have they got an ID card? And we began to work with people around the lives that they live. And through working with people on the lives that they live, then you learnt about what's important for them and what areas of self-guarding they need to address. So we have that running now I suppose an embedded way with adults, and now we're looking towards widening it into people in our respite, residential and general services. Moving on then, we have social work students. I'm sure everybody here has social work students who come to you on a regular basis, and we would probably have social work students coming from UCD, UCC, Galway and Trinity. Wow. So, and again, the whole idea about the whole safeguarding was, yeah, we can do the 3.5-hour training program, as we're very familiar with, but what we want to do is give them experience. This is actually the impact. This is actually how it starts from beginning to end, and these are the results of intervention. And moving on here, we did the same with social care students. And I'm delighted to say one of the social care students we had last year took on her thesis, her fourth-year thesis on safeguarding. And when she presented it to the college, it was their first experience. And I think she did terribly well in it, because she probably was able to say, this is the policy, this is the procedure, this is what's happening. So it was good, and her presentation came from that involvement. So what I'm really going here is spreading and embedding, so the people who cross your professional life, the people who cross your services, that you're actually not only just going, let's go into a training room, and it's actually giving real life experience. The Garda student placements, so we're aware that even from the budget yesterday, again, there's going to be another recruitment around the Guards. So the Guards then come to our area on placement for 6 weeks during their 1.5 years, and we take them then for 2 weeks. And then now that's just starting. We did it before, we're just building it in again. And again, the reason behind that we take them is so they get an understanding of the whole area of disability and now safeguarding. Because I'll go local. If you go to, I'm live now, so if I go to the wonderful Garda station of Swinford, if I go to the wonderful Garda station of Castlebar, they're very helpful, but they have different approaches, okay? And the different approaches, which I can understand, what you need to then is have a big discussion in relation to safeguarding, what that means, going through that, and why we were having the discussions that we're at, and then we get to discuss the case. So the whole idea of working with Garda students and working with their managers is that you actually cross that board. And I think that was referred to this morning, where you're working with the Guards as well, which is very important. Now, the Mayo Social Learning Network is something that we put in place 3 years ago. And the idea of the Mayo Social Work Network was you have your child and family agency social workers, you have your probation officers, you have your social workers in learning disability, you have your social workers in the hospital, you have your social workers in adult mental health, and you have CAMS. I think I've got them all kind of covered there. So the idea was that we would meet for an afternoon once every quarter, and that somebody would do a presentation on, this is what I do for a living. So I'm a social worker in child protection, this is what I do. And they would do a 45-minute or a 1-hour presentation, and then they would take half-hour questions. And that meant that the entire support services in Mayo now understand that's what they do, that's the criteria, that's somebody, and it puts a face on it. And then 3 months later, we'd have, say, a social worker from Western Care working in the adult learning disability sector and describing, this is what I do, this is what you can expect of me, and you're beginning to network. And then we had, in the back row there, we have our local safeguarding team, Seamus and Denise, and they came then to the Mayo Social Work Learning Network and they said, this is what we do, this is how the process works. And all of a sudden, that is embedding the learning. And now, as you move forward, you can imagine you're into year 2 and year 3 and you get into, but you have faces, you have contact, and you have expectations, and you're putting in place safeguarding for your population. Okay, the Mayo Joint Policing Committee. Mayo Joint Policing Committee, every county has a joint policing committee, and that looks towards the interest of the population in your county and in relation to, you know, instances of concern that arise. I can't tell you exactly what's happening because we're live and I won't be kind of giving it away. But what we did under the Mayo Joint Policing Committee again is that the presentation that Seamus, our local safeguarding team, did to the Mayo Social Work Learning Network was overwhelming and taken so well that we wheeled him in and he came in and did a presentation to the Mayo Joint Policing Committee. Now, I'm being witty and funny, but that is a list of people who have been touched and saying, safeguarding, I understand what it means. I understand what the role is, and I understand the expectations of me. So what you're doing is you're putting down your foundations for change on top of the training that you're doing. Galway Mayo Institute of Technology, I think, Regina, you're going to refer to our engagement there. Okay, so the slide here just says policies and procedures are the foundation of change. There's no argument, because they are. So once you have your procedures, once you have your policies, we all understand that. But the real area is in the area of discussion, exploration, communication, deliberation, explanation and partnership. Give credibility and sustainability. So what I'm really saying is the second point there, they're the business in hand. You can have all the greatest policies in the world, you can have all the greatest procedures in the world, and the only way they're implemented in practice is by complete understanding. And I think one of the key words is the idea of communication in relation to understanding. So I think when we're talking this morning about a good facilitator, is somebody who should really drink more water because his mouth goes dry. But a good facilitator in relation to the skills is the listening skills, is the ability to hold an audience in your hand, is the ability to target out particular people who have particular questions. And that's the good skill of, you know, facilitation plus more. In relation to this whole area of safeguarding, it's about communication. Because there always was an expression, you know, my mother used to say it when I went out on a Friday night, you know, you wave the Toomey flag when you're out and about, so everything you do represents the Toomey flag. So when I used to go home on a Sunday morning, waving the Toomey flag, but in a sense, doesn't it? So the whole, I suppose the whole mission of my presentation today is, even the best way, is communication. Because communication is everything. Everything. And being available to answer a question. And, you know, even to be available when someone's asking you something, let them watch you thinking it through. Not to kind of have the very quick answer. And the biggest area of courage is to reverse your decision. And as a designated officer, say, I need some time on this. Or if you suggested that a certain thing and you go home, you think it through and you say, there's an issue there. Be courageous. Go back and say, no, that ain't going to work that way. I've thought this through. The respect that you'll get, and it's not about, you know, you becoming more and more, it's about people believing more and more in relation to the whole thought process. Okay, so every day is a new day. I didn't even use my script. I'd be so sad on the way home on the train. But I do believe the script on every day is a new day was, I was saying, like, you can look at a typical morning as a designated officer, as a principal social worker, as a practicing social worker, and as a manager in an organisation. So 9 o'clock you got a meeting, 9:45 you got a case review, 11 o'clock you've got supervision, 11:30 you've something else, hopefully a tea break. And what happens is you've got a diary plan. So there are certain things tomorrow that you know you're going to do and certain things. But what happens is you get a call at 20 to 10 in the morning and there's an issue of concern. And there's excitement around a certain area because that's what happens. And what they need to know is from the designated officer, does this fit the criteria? Or from designated officer, should Mary go home? Or should John go to work in Tesco and his placement at 12 o'clock because of such and such? So as a role, your role is to respond to that. Your role is to be there. Your role is to guide that. And your role then, obviously exploring the whole idea of the 3-day in relation to the preliminary screening or the safeguarding plan and the full safeguarding plan, but it's your availability. So in a sense, the reason I'm saying every day is a new day, you got your diary planned, and then you go back to whatever you're doing, and they're implementing that. And then, I don't know, 12:30, there's a new phone call. Even this morning, when I was sitting there, relaxing with my glass of water at 9:20, there was a call in relation to a particular issue of safeguarding. Luckily, I have the safeguarding team with me, so we can talk about it on the train on the way home. Yeah, so no matter what carriage you're on, I'll find you. Right? We're having a 3.5-hour meeting on the way home. But so, in a sense, what I'm saying is your availability. And when we're projecting to the future and we're thinking about, what would make a good facilitator for the training, we also look towards, and I know in relation to some agencies have said, look, we'll have a full-time designated officer. And that, to me, can be a very positive move. But in relation to, you still have to be engaged with lots of what's happening in the agency so that you actually feel, because it's, I suppose, I'm going from experience as well, staff need to believe in you. Staff need to have the trust in you. Staff need to be able to reveal things to you. And in a sense, the fantastic presentation that was done earlier, just the lady before me, and the weight of HICWA and all that, we don't want to feel the weight of a designated officer. We got to work in partnership. But that partnership also has to be, you take the learning and you implement the learning. So when we're doing the 3.5-hour training program, on a serious note, I look for change. So if I'm going to be engaging with a staff member 3 months later or 6 months later, I have to understand they've taken the learning, they're coming to me with a query, so that they're not coming from a naive point of view. Do you know what I mean? But in a sense, I am also aware when that case is done and dusted and moved on, I need to trust that they'll come back to me in 6 months' time with something new. So it's about that honest relationship and about that honest personality. And as I said, it's also that honesty about being courageous in relation to reversing decisions. Memory person. And now working off memory from this as well. The memory person situation around the designated officer is, someone might say to me, oh God, you dealt with the case now in December 2016, it was Mary and John, do you remember? Well, God, something has happened again in relation to John and Mary. Just wondered, should we do the same thing we did before? And you're going, wow, well, where are we going now? And this is now, one, it might be a corridor conversation saying, can I find a room to talk to you? That's no problem. And then, can I just remember who Mary is? But the thing is, when you're in this business, you do remember who Mary is and you do remember who John is. But there is a lot of revisiting of situations that have been addressed in the past because there might be changes in particular systems and I suppose particular settings. So when I'm talking about a memory person, it's part of, it's like the old thing about the guard. The guard always knew everybody in the village and knew what was happening, and Johnny be okay because he'd find his way home. Memory person is very important, or to recognise that skill and to develop that skill. I hope people can recognise this in your own work. Accountability and responsibility. As Seamus once said to me, you're only as good as your last preliminary screening. Do you remember that day? A rainy day in a car park. All of a sudden you were locked out, you didn't know why, you couldn't come back in. But in a sense, you are, and if you think about a decision you had to make yesterday, or a phone call that you get on a train, or you're on a bus, and it's someone's life we're talking about. And we want to be, and you need that time to be able to reflect. But you are, in that person's eyes, the person that you've spoken to who has that responsibility, and in the recipient, the person we're caring about, you are as good as the decision you made, just about them. So you can look back on the wonderful 75 great decisions I made about that, but I made not a good one. And that's the one. So in a sense, you do need to be aware of that, and you need to decide with your managers and your agency around, if this comes your way, this is, and Regina has to go next, this decision I have to make needs to be the priority. So you need to suspend other stuff and have that ability and that flexibility within your setting. Share the learning. Now, I'll say this very quickly. As well as being designated officer and addressing the whole area of, I'm deliberately going to speak fast now to help us cover the area of preliminary screening. Like many, many agencies, we have incident injury procedures. Okay, and people say, how do you differentiate between an incident injury that happens and then you have a whole preliminary screening in relation to someone's safeguarding? So what we have is a system that I think it's probably something we're going to discuss in time to come, but you have a rating, so you have a manageability 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've a severity 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Severity is obviously for the individual. The manageability was how difficult was it to manage. Now, as a designated officer, those incident injuries come to me online and the ratings. And we have a system, if it hits a 4 or a 5, it immediately warrants a preliminary screening. So immediately meets the criteria around the safeguarding. If it's a lower level, a 1, 2, 3, you're saying that needs to be monitored. You're still inviting and looking for an immediate change. And if it reoccurs, guess what? The change didn't work. You're escalating that up and you're into a safeguarding issue. That's very quick now. That normally takes half a day to explain. Maintain relationships and trust. I've referred to that already. You must be a trustworthy relationship in relation to your decisions and your credibility. And, oh, look at that. Regina, sorry, I'm finished, and I think I've finished your slide. Are you okay? Okay, so I'm going to let you know, but in summary, my mission here today was just to really say a glimpse into the life of your role as a designated officer, your role as a facilitator on the safeguarding, and also, a bit like we said earlier on, you know, you do the training, but it's all the other people, and it's about building those relationships, and it's about then inviting their, I suppose, involvement in the welfare and the best interests of the people we support.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Regina Chambers, and I'm a social work team leader with Western Care Association. I'm an act as designated officer, and I also am a trainer in terms of the policy. I put myself on a slideshow detoxification program, so I'm not actually using a slideshow. That all seemed like a very good idea until break time, and while I was biting into a tuna bap, I began to feel a bit vulnerable, and because I know from Maggie's slideshow that a 40-word slideshow would have been perfect, and that I also knew the pitfalls of not having one, so here we go. I probably couldn't feel vulnerable in a better kind of group of people, so that's reassuring also. But I suppose on a serious note, historically, we have been working in terms of safeguarding all of our working lives. So David and I have delivered safeguarding training for both children and adults from Children First point of view, and our own internal training for the past 20 years. And I suppose all of that time we had our own policies, as I'm sure is the case for many of people in the room, okay? And at times we probably felt like lone wolves, wondering, did anyone really understand what we were talking about? David referred back to Ann Wall. I remember going down to Ann Wall in 2007, where we invited this guy called Colin The Hand, and we thought he was really helpful at that particular time. Anne would have loved today, by the way. She would have really enjoyed it, and she would have looked fantastic. And this would have been a culmination of all the things that were really important to Anne. So I suppose at that time we were kind of working away in the dark, and then unfortunately and I suppose behind the scenes we felt, and again, not just Western Care, but many organisations here in the room, we were probably in our own way moving towards a national policy, and we had a draft actually until 2014, and events sort of propelled us into the policy that we have now, okay? And I suppose it's not a perfect policy, but it's a policy. Warts and all, we have a national policy, and I suppose the policy has given us an arena to discuss adult safeguarding, which we had never had before. So that's a really important, I suppose, platform to be able to speak from. I suppose going back to Michael's conversations from this morning, one of the things that I just wanted to, I suppose, maybe say to Tim and people that are reviewing the policy, social workers and people who have been providing the training for 20 years are very adept at having very good conversations, because we've worked in the absence of any legislation and any policy for so long that we have probably been achieving outcomes against all odds on a continual basis. So there is a lot of skill there, and that wheel doesn't have to be reinvented. So I think that's, I suppose, it's a good resource to go back to, and it's important to remember to include people in order to keep them on board. Okay, would the slideshow have been better? I don't know. With regard to the GMIT and safeguarding training, as part of my role, and I suppose an additional thing that I do in my own private life, I do some lecturing in the GMIT in Castlebar. And again, as David used the word spreading and embedding, I started to spread and embed. Part of that involved I suppose speaking to the GMIT in Castlebar and linking with the National Safeguarding Office about providing the national safeguarding training to fourth-year social studies students, because we would have felt that it would have been a good thing to do to have fourth-year students coming out into the workplace, having been trained in the policy and being clear about their requirements before they got into a workplace, that they came, I suppose, prepared and full of kind of ideas in relation to this. It also, on a very practical level, means that if people are coming to an organisation, they can produce their 3-year cert and they're working immediately. So that was just, I suppose, a new way of making sure that the people that will be caring for the people we support in the future are coming ready with that. Just in terms of HICWA, Joe and Catherine mentioned it before, part of, I suppose, the role of a trainer is evaluated every time there is a HICWA inspection, because every time we would have 36 sites and practically every day there's unannounced visits, etc., etc. And part of that will involve an interview with our staff to see, do they understand the definitions and the indicators of abuse? Are they prepared to report in certain circumstances? And their subsequent report under point 8 on every HICWA report, to a degree, were audited. So it's important to, I suppose, acknowledge the responsibility in relation to that. Again, people talked about it this morning a little bit, and I won't labour the point, but there is quite a lot of double working with regard to requirements around HICWA and our requirements with national safeguarding, in that for concerns that arrive in residential services, there's an NFO6 that have to be reported back. People are probably very nodding heads. People know what NFO6s are. And then you've got the 20-day report back to HICWA. In the same way we're doing a preliminary screening and the safeguarding plan. So sometimes it's a little bit of a double whammy on staff, and we're asking staff who were already quite heavily burdened with HICWA requirements in terms of paperwork to stick with us, because it's an important factor. So it's important for the future. The other thing that we, I suppose, have carried out in our own organisation is we started when the national safeguarding staff were put in place in our CHO2 area. We started organising to meet with them every 4 to 6 weeks, and this has been really, really helpful. And I suppose part of the 6 weekly meeting would involve looking at recent referrals, looking at the status of implemented plans. We would review safeguarding situations, review 6 monthly closures, etc. And we'd also, I suppose, have face-to-face contact. And I think that's what Michael was talking about this morning. Sometimes forms arriving through email can be a bit cold, and people can sometimes not put that little bit of time into investing in relationships and having conversations. And the ability to sit down with the people we forward our preliminary screenings to on a 6 weekly basis allows us to have conversations like, we're not sending you a preliminary screening on this right here, right now, but this is a person we're very concerned about. And it allows us to have that, I suppose, conversation and I suppose, and also an acknowledgement that, a little bit what Joe said earlier on, we've shared this and we're holding it. And it also is about, I suppose, building a confidence around knowing each other's practice. Okay, so that's been, I suppose, helpful in our area. Okay, just one, I think I've got the list of things that Tim said not to say, so I'll just go through some of those. I'm just joking, Tim. I suppose just as part of maybe reviewing the training, things that I think would be helpful would be supporting trainers with a kind of a national risk strategy of some description, so that people are, making decisions around risk from some sort of a national policy point of view. Again, lots of people who have spoken today have talked about the feedback from staff. People want stories. People want human outcomes as to what happened, how people's lives were changed, etc., etc. I think some of the slides at the end of the actual training, some of them are about HSE, good faith reporting policy. I think that they could be all put on a handout and given to people, because it does occupy a good part of very valuable time. David and I have learned to speak very, very quickly, and sometimes people are just staring at us. So that kind of stuff I think is important to incorporate into a review of the training. Let me see, is there anything else? The other thing is that we probably feel that in terms of the training, clips like from Winterbourne, except other places, etc., would be helpful and liven up the training. Okay, because I came last, lots of other things have been said, so thank you for listening to me.